Ireland has vast stretches of remote rural countryside, whether it's the rolling hills of the Midlands, or the desolate bogs of the West, or the countless isolated farms and trails. Many are drawn every year to visit, and most come and go without a problem. But for a few, this is not the case. Ireland typically sees around 12,000 missing person reports annually, and 99% of them are solved each year, and most within 48 hours. But there are a handful of cases that remain stubbornly unsolved, or where the facts offered fail to paint the whole picture. Let's begin with Aleida Maria Anderske Kaspersma, otherwise known as Leidy to her family and friends, who was born on the 8th of March 1952 in the Netherlands. She was the youngest of 3 daughters to parents who encouraged the adventurous streak that she had. Her sister Nellie described her as a hippie girl who had a love for people, animals and the open road. Leidy was a highly intelligent person with a very robust education. She was fluent in Dutch, English, French and German, and she pursued practical vocations that fueled her nomadism. By her early 20s, she had worked as a nursing home aide in Hamburg, Germany, where she tended to the elderly. She then went on to work as a nanny in Dallas, Texas, and then later she became a teacher to very young people back home in the Netherlands. In some sense, these roles were more like chapters in her life rather than just jobs, since she travelled all over the world and settled all over the place. While back in the Netherlands, at some point she'd got into a relationship that didn't quite work out, and this propelled her towards Ireland in the spring of 1978. It seems that she wanted to get away for a while and have some solace in the Emerald Isles' misty hills, completely unaware that it would become her final destination. While on a ferry crossing from Dublin to Holyhead in Wales in late May of 1978, now 26 years old, Leidy crossed paths with Nick Wheatley, a 29-year-old Englishman. He was an aspiring poet fresh from a divorce that left him adrift with a young daughter. They made an instant connection with one another on the ferry, and their relationship would later be described as a whirlwind romance. Within weeks, they had returned to Ireland together and had decided to camp in a remote hayfield somewhere in the Erneen area, described as being roughly 9 kilometres away from Kenmare, so potentially around here somewhere. Their camping site was adjacent to a cottage owned by Nick's friends, Andrew and Cece Woods. The pair thrived in the outdoors, and I believe that they decided to camp out in this area for a while as a makeshift living situation. I'd imagine they spent a lot of time with the Woods family, and likely used their home to shower and such. In late June, cracks began to emerge in their relationship, and Nick seemed to be torn by a paternal pull and wanted to reconcile with his ex-wife back in the UK. Leidy was quite a resilient person, and outwardly took this news well, all things considered. Now off the back of 2 separate breakups, reportedly she wasn't angry, but was practical about the situation that she found herself in. She inquired about temporary living with the Woods family, though I am not sure if the Woods agreed to it or not. On the 2nd of July in 1978, Leidy and Nick, who were still civil with one another at this time post-breakup, had driven into Kenmare for some routine shopping in their shared car, an Opel Record estate. During this outing, Leidy had visited a local coffee shop, and witnesses would go on to report that her demeanour was a bit off-kilter, or in other words, she seemed a bit fidgety and uneasy. This led to speculations, and people wondered if she was under more psychological stress than she'd let on, perhaps taking the breakup harder than she was openly admitting. Perhaps she was homesick, or a mixture of the two, or maybe she was just feeling something else entirely that we just don't know. We can only really guess as to why she might have seemed uneasy, since those internal thoughts just cannot be known to us. Before we go any further, if I could just ask you to like the video and hype it, then I would appreciate that very much, and please consider turning on notifications for the channel and subscribing if you haven't already. By late afternoon, at around 4:30 PM, both Leidy and Nick were back in the car, heading towards Erneen on the N71. This is a serpentine-like road that is flanked by bogs, heather-clad hills, and at some points sheer drops. It is important to highlight that the following account was from Nick's perspective. He stated that at approximately 4:30 PM, as they were driving along the secluded road about 1 kilometre from the Woods residence, Leidy abruptly asked him to stop the car and let her out. He stated that she turned to him, looked him in the eye, gave him a kiss, and then exited the Opel. At this point, she started to walk on the road back towards Kenmare, in the direction that they'd just come from. After coming off the N71, the route was essentially just countryside roads that were not well travelled. According to Nick, Leidy had not said anything about her immediate plans. He sat in the car and watched her recede for a few moments before driving on back to the campsite. He went on and stated that he interpreted her actions as a desire for isolation following the recent breakup that they'd just had. Some have pointed out that the geographical context of the location is crucial to highlight here. The area that she was dropped off is mountainous and includes deep ravines. While speculating, if someone had later come across Leidy that held particularly bad intentions, then the seclusion of the rural road would have provided an ideal location for such a thing. It was broad daylight at the time that she was dropped off, though if it was not well travelled as described, then there still might have been ample opportunity. And obviously, especially later as it got dark, if she was still out there somewhere. A lot of people have also had a problem with Nick's account too, because it contains some logical inconsistencies. In this version of events, it means that Leidy had a sudden departure from a remote location without any resources, including her identification, as her passport and other personal items were either back at the camp or inside the Woods residence. People have also highlighted that this supposed amicable kiss seems to be difficult to reconcile with a relationship that had just ended, followed by a decision to walk away by herself into rugged terrain. Upon returning to camp, Nick waited for a while, and then as it got darker, he said that he became concerned. He drove back up the rural road and then up the N71 to Kenmare, but didn't see her along the road or in the town. He also called other friends to see if Leidy had stayed with them. When they all said no, he apparently had just assumed that she had made her own way to a B&B or somewhere else and did not pursue it further. I suppose suggesting that the relationship between the two was now just officially over and all ties were gone. On the following day, the 3rd, Nick left the campsite, said his goodbyes to the Woods, and travelled to Dublin where he'd been offered some casual work. Back in the Netherlands, Leidy's parents, who were used to frequent correspondence with her, now weren't hearing anything. Her mother's 60th birthday passed by without the expected card or call from Leidy that would usually accompany it. Her parents managed to get in contact with Nick somehow, and they told him that they hadn't heard from her. So, around 23 days after she was last seen, on the 25th of July, Nick returned to Kenmare, walked into the police station and reported her missing. This profound delay meant that the investigation was deprived of the critical golden hours, or the first 48 to 72, which are crucial for tracking movements, establishing forensic boundaries, and interviewing potential witnesses. After the 72-hour mark, things become notably more difficult for the authorities. The abilities of the guard eye to conduct an immediate search in the rugged terrain was nullified, allowing any potential trail, physical evidence, or witness memory to dissipate entirely. This massive delay is widely perceived as the fundamental failure point of the case and the reason it became practically unsolvable. Nick rationalised his own behaviour in delaying the missing persons report by maintaining his initial belief that Leidy had gone off to have her own space after the breakup. This defence seems somewhat undermined by the fact that she had virtually no money on her person and had left her account untouched. Her card was also left either at the campsite or the Woods home, alongside her glasses and passport. After all, a spontaneous need for privacy, which can happen, does not negate the necessity for money or other basic necessities over the period of weeks. The suspicion of Nick's behaviour is further compounded by the allegation that during this 23-day period he sold the shared Opel Record estate car. The vehicle was reportedly never traced, so we can be fairly confident that the car was either sold or scrapped. People have pointed out that getting rid of the car, which was a significant shared asset between the two, was very strange right after her disappearance. Also, given the fact that it was a shared asset, you'd like to think that she'd have had some say in that decision. I suppose Nick would have argued that he didn't realise that she was missing right away and that the relationship was just over, and she'd just left and the two were now on their separate paths. Leidy's family never accepted this narrative. They remained convinced that someone was responsible for her disappearance and openly expressed doubt concerning the integrity of those that knew her in the Kenmare area. The Gardaí, on the other hand, were hampered by the delay, but began their search. Their initial sweeps of the N71 stretch yielded nothing. Further searches off the roads never revealed her bag, her boot prints, or anything else. Local villagers and those who owned land nearby never recalled seeing anyone walking along the roads. A farmer said, "There's no way that girl is in these hills. If she was, we'd know, and also her clothes and belongings would have shown up long ago." Those in the coffee shop on the 2nd of July reported seeing her earlier, but she was never placed again after 4:30 p.m. Nick was questioned on numerous occasions. In late 1979 and 1980, authorities conducted a review which didn't uncover anything. Detectives travelled to England in 2001 to interview him again, but still nothing came of it. In more recent years, Nick has said, "There are only 3 solutions to what happened to Leidy. One is she went off and perhaps took a lift with someone or met someone and disappeared into that person's world. Or she disappeared voluntarily. And the one which I try not to think about is that she was met with foul play." Nick also moved to Lebanon, where he set up an English school. Interestingly, the search that took place when she was reported missing did not include a full-scale Kerry mountain rescue search, which only took place 8 months after she vanished. So it doesn't appear that the authorities were particularly great in this instance. I don't really understand what was going on with that. It seems that the 2 most prominent hypotheses relate to foul play or a voluntary disappearance. Many have pointed the finger at Nick, stating that his behaviour was dubious and suspicious. I think for a lot of people, the car also seemingly going missing too didn't help in that regard, either being sold or scrapped. It's interesting too because surely the police had the foresight to ask Nick some important questions, such as, hey, what happened to the car? So they must have some kind of statement in regards to that, but it's not known publicly. And the car was just never traced. You'd have to just assume on that basis that it's either destroyed or had been sold and taken out of the country, because there's just no way that it would have remained completely untraceable if someone that had nothing to do with anything was just out there driving it around in Ireland. Other people seem to favour a voluntary disappearance. I suppose spurred on by the fact that she'd been seen publicly by witnesses in the coffee shop who had said that she seemed to be in an uneasy state at the time. Either way, the case remains open, and as of 2025, 47 years later, there is still no resolution and it's not clear what happened to Leidy. There is just no evidence that can be pointed to that would confirm anything. Now, at this point, let's go forwards 10 years. The disappearance of Priscilla Clarke in 1988 is another of Ireland's odd, unexplained disappearances. Priscilla was born on the 10th of August in 1962 in Edmontown in County Louth, where she grew up in a close-knit family. There isn't a ton of information known about her early life, though we do know that she qualified as a nursery nurse in 1983 at Temple Hill Hospital. Caring for young people seemed to have been a great passion of hers, and she was said to have been an asset to the hospital, so I'm sure that she was very good at what she did. She must have been, because sometime after qualifying, she was personally picked out and began working as a live-in nanny for Mark and Linda Kavanagh. The Kavanaghs were a prominent family in Dublin's social scene, as Mark owned the popular Captain America's restaurant on Grafton Street. Mark was also recognised for giving the musician Chris de Burgh his first career opportunity. Mark was born in Ireland, while Linda was originally from Chicago. They would end up meeting at Trinity College, which I believe is within the University of Dublin. During their relationship, they had 3 young children together, named Keelan, Michael and Serena. At this time, Priscilla had been with them for about 5 years, forming a bond described by the family as more like a friendship than employment, which I could imagine being the case, given just how much time she will have been around the entire family unit. She was also very well liked and regarded by the Kavanaghs, who all thought a lot of her. In late 1987, the family, including Priscilla, relocated from Dublin to Balliorny House in Enniskerry, County Wicklow. This is a rural area known for its estates and natural beauty, including the nearby Powerscourt Estate and River Dargle. I get the sense that they moved as a result of threats that had been made against them. The 1980s was a very turbulent time for Ireland, and when they lived in Dublin, the family had been assigned some police officers that were stationed outside nearby their family home. When they moved to this rural area, this security detail was thought not to have been required, so those precautions were not continued after the move. In any case, Priscilla was fit, and I think quite athletic in some ways because she was described as an experienced horse rider and a very strong swimmer. The events leading to Priscilla's disappearance unfolded against a backdrop of severe weather. Heavy rain had persisted for days prior to the 3rd of May 1988, causing rivers like the Dargle to swell and flow more rapidly. What was typically a shallow, crossable stream had become much more hazardous as a result of this. On the 3rd, which was a Tuesday, the Kavanagh youngsters were all unusually absent from their home, as normally everyone was present. They were all spending some time at various neighbours' homes, playing with their friends. At around 4 PM that day, Linda phoned Mark, who was in Dublin at the time for work, and she told him that she and Priscilla were going to head out on a horseback ride. From what I can tell, Linda and Priscilla got on very well with one another, and they both absolutely loved horse riding, so this was something that they probably enjoyed bonding over. Sadly, this call would later be cited as the last confirmed communication that the pair would ever have. Shortly after the call, witnesses reported seeing 2 riders entering Charleville Estate, which is a part of Powerscourt. One was positively identified as Linda, but the second rider, oddly, was not recognised. Though while some early doubts were had as to whether or not this was actually Priscilla, I believe that most generally accepted that it very likely was Priscilla. By evening, the situation turned concerning. At approximately 8:15 PM, Michael, 8, was returned home by the neighbour to find that the house was empty and unlocked, which was a detail that the family found unusual. The reason for this was because Linda was well known for her safety consciousness. She was not a risk taker and took security and safety very seriously. So leaving the home unlocked was something that was considered to have been out of character. The same can also be said for Priscilla. She was not the kind of person to leave the front door unlocked. From the home, Michael called his father, who also came back and arrived just as the youngest, Serena, was being dropped off too. Mark roamed the premises looking for any sign of Linda or Priscilla, but he couldn't locate them. Mark was obviously immediately concerned and could not understand what had happened or where they'd gone. He called the authorities, and this would begin a large-scale search effort. Given Mark's prominence and connections, initial thoughts were that foul play could have been involved, and Mark wondered if he might receive a note demanding payment or something along those lines. It seems that the authorities also took that line of thought seriously because the army and specialised units also got involved with the search. The following day, both of the horses were found wandering on a nearby road, and I believe towards the direction of the home. Or I suppose in other words, the horses had returned alone without their riders. They were wet, which wasn't surprising given the weather at the time. On the 4th, Priscilla's family were notified at 2:30 AM, which plunged them into a nightmare situation. The main searches focused on the River Dargle and surrounding areas where the swollen waters were deemed as the most likely culprit. On the 5th of May, Linda's body was recovered from the river near Bray and was snagged on a branch that prevented being swept to sea. This discovery led to the official presumption that the authorities believed both women had attempted to cross the river on horseback, leading to an accident. Not everyone accepted that this was simply an accident though. While they were both good horseback riders, as mentioned, Linda was said to be very safety cautious, and one look at the river should have been all she needed to know that crossing was not a good idea. The river was extremely swollen at this point and moving quickly. So given the type of person that she was, it's not clear at all why she would have attempted this. Some have wondered if there may have been another reason, and they were trying to get away from someone or something along those lines. And then as a result of that, they took this risk to cross the river, knowing that they wouldn't be followed. I suppose people were citing the earlier threats made against them in Dublin. Of course, there is no real evidence of that, and the only evidence of anything is that Linda's body was found in the river. So, no matter how or why the crossing attempt happened, if that is what even happened, the river was so dangerous and scary looking that it could have frightened the horses, who through fear could have accidentally flung the riders from their backs, where they then fell into the water. Despite finding Linda, no trace of Priscilla was ever found, They never found a body, clothing, or any personal items of hers. A jacket was later recovered from the river that was initially thought to be hers, but family members described it as being much too big for her and likely belonged to a man. It also had cigarettes in the pocket, and Priscilla was not a smoker. The fact that Linda was found within 48 hours while Priscilla was not can only mean a couple of things. Either Priscilla's body became irretrievably lodged in a deep hidden area of the riverbed, or because of the high turbulence at the time, was carried right through the river to the Irish Sea, preventing any retrieval attempts to ever have been successful. The fact that Priscilla was never found caused some to believe, based on the threats that were made to the family, that she may have fallen off the horse and was subsequently removed from the area by another person. Again though, there was no direct evidence of a struggle or foul play. The official search was stood down on the 9th of May 1988 after just 6 days of searching, with the authorities citing that they needed to redirect resources elsewhere. This felt like a major injustice to the Clarke family, who felt that the authorities had prioritised Linda due to her social status, while not treating their daughter as important. This led to the Clarkes organising their own search efforts, which went on for 6 weeks. They had divers in the river and posters all over the place appealing to the public for help. Years passed without anything being uncovered, and in 1995 another body washed ashore in Kilmac Ridge, County Wexford. There was no inquest and the body was buried anonymously. When the Clarke family discovered that this was the case, in 2007 they obviously found it odd and requested that the body to be tested to see if it was Priscilla. In 2008, authorities reopened the investigation, re-interviewed witnesses, and as per the family's request, conducted DNA testing on the body, but found that it was not Priscilla. It is also important to point out that this disappearance took place at a time where technological limitations hampered the ability of the search teams to thoroughly examine the deeper or turbulent sections of the river. More modern advancements, such as high-resolution sonar and remote underwater mapping, could have helped a great deal here. The official position from the authorities is that it is likely that Priscilla fell into the river and passed away beneath the surface of the water and remains lost in the river. There has never been any evidence to contradict this, such as a sighting around the country or anything like that, and given that Linda's body was found within the river, it does seem likely that would be the case. It seems to me the question mark for some is the nature as to how she entered the water. Some accept that it was a clear-cut case of an accident, while others seem to believe that the two women were spooked in the first place and then took a risk in crossing the river to get away. I suppose, to that end, the earlier threats made against the family in Dublin probably helped push people towards those opinions. I'm not sure how likely foul play is in this case though. I'm not sure why the door was left unlocked, perhaps that was accidental, even though it was out of character for the both of them. To suggest foul play, you have to make the case that someone with bad intentions was just out by the river that day, and was either waiting or just happened across Linda and Priscilla. It's not impossible I suppose, though you have to make more assumptions than an accidental fall. Recent appeals, including one on the 36th anniversary in 2024, have yielded no breakthroughs. Mark Kavanagh, who remarried and moved abroad, described the event as life-altering, but I don't think he ever speculated on foul play. Priscilla's parents never had closure, and her disappearance, while thought to be understood, has never been fully solved. As of the current time, on the 29th of October 2025, Priscilla remains officially missing, with no body or trace ever having been recovered. On that note, and sadly, that brings us to the end of this. Please do remember to subscribe and turn on notifications for the channel, and also to like the video and hype it if you can, I'd be very grateful. Or a dislike if you disliked it. I'd just like to thank you for watching, and a really big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. Be safe all, peace.